Hey, special educators. Welcome to Teach, Taskbox, Inspire, the podcast dedicated to making your job as a special education teacher easier by making your instruction more fun for you and your students. Inside each episode, you'll learn how to get the most use out of your task boxes in the classroom. I'm your host, Lisa Holliday from Chalkboard Superhero, a veteran special education teacher passionate about empowering you with purposeful teaching strategies, helpful tips and tricks, and other classroom management tools that will help you thrive in your role. Let's get started with today's episode. Hey there, special educators, and welcome back to another episode of Teach, Taskbox, Inspire. I'm your host, Lisa Holliday, and today we're diving into a crucial topic that affects so many of our students, yet it really isn't discussed enough: trauma and how it impacts our classroom. Whether you're a special education teacher, a paraprofessional, a therapist, or even a parent, understanding trauma and using trauma-informed practices is key to helping our students thrive. Trauma is, unfortunately, one of the biggest health crises affecting children and educators today. As educators, we encounter students who've been through some unimaginable experiences: abuse, neglect, violence, or even the trauma brought on by that awful pandemic. The effects of trauma go beyond just physical or emotional responses. It can deeply affect how a child regulates their emotions, or really their sense of self-worth, their ability to kind of build relationships, and really kind of their overall success in the classroom. So what exactly is trauma? According to Susan E. Craig in her book, Building Trauma-Sensitive Schools, trauma is defined as a distressing experience or set of experiences that threatens a person's actual safety or their perceived sense of safety to such an extent that exceeds their capacity to cope in healthy ways. This basically means that when a child experiences trauma, they might find it real difficult to manage their emotions, or they might feel more prone to anxiety and depression. They have trouble forming relationships or even acting out aggressively. And guys, the numbers are staggering. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network reports that at least 25% of American students have been impacted by trauma, and this number has only increased since the pandemic. That is insane. Out of 100 kids, 25 of them are struggling with trauma. So why does this matter for us as educators, especially as special educators? Trauma doesn't just stay at home. It really walks into our classrooms every single day, and it affects how students learn and behave and really connect with their peers. In fact, many of the behaviors we find challenging, such as like that refusal to engage or aggression, or maybe they're withdrawing, could be directly linked to overwhelming experiences of trauma. In Craig's book, she emphasizes that a trauma-sensitive approach helps educators recognize that many of these tough, interactable behaviors are rooted in past relational trauma. We, as special educators, are often the first ones to recognize that something might be off. Maybe it's a child's behavior. Maybe it's a change in their physical appearance, or even how they interact with their peers. And while we must always be cautious, remembering that not every behavior is linked to trauma, teachers are often on the front lines when it comes to identifying these signs and being mandated reporters. So, how do we create a trauma-sensitive classroom? It really starts with acknowledging that trauma is present and understanding how it affects our students. From there, we can adjust the way we teach and interact to kind of create an environment where students all feel safe and supported and capable of growth. I happen to work at a school that serves a low income community. And I feel like this has kind of become one of my jobs where I am constantly working on students' mental health, and they come in every day. And if I have a student withdrawing or kind of breaking down easily, or I know that they're just kind of off, I will pull them out into the hallway or kind of say, okay, what's going on? How can I help? All I'm trying to do is make sure that these students are loved and cared for and feel safe at school. So here are some trauma-informed strategies that you can start using right away. So number one, having a predictable schedule and routine. I know that seems simple, but really having a consistent schedule posted around the classroom really helps students know what to expect. It reduces that anxiety and it creates that sense of safety. Now, I'm sure most of you are already doing that. Number two is opportunities for self-regulation. I want you to try to build in chances for students to kind of slow down and regulate their emotions. So things like deep breathing exercises or brain breaks or even movement-based activities like using a classroom trampoline can help students refocus. I know it's hard to do because we're trying to jam-pack every single opportunity with teaching, but taking these times to kind of like take a breath, take a beat, really helps them with that self-regulation. Number three, fostering strong school-home partnerships. I know this is hard because some of you who are listening right now have a full classroom of 25, 30 kids, and it's really hard to kind of make those connections between parents, but keeping that communication open with families. Trauma is an ongoing issue, and kind of building that trust with that family, you can better support the student at school. So using things like Parent Square or other different apps to kind of communicate with the families really helps better that student. Number four, making the classroom a safe space. Now, I know some of you are like, duh, Lisa, we all have a safe space. But I really want you to be mindful of creating an environment that feels welcoming and not threatening. This can include how you set up the physical space to really how you handle challenging behaviors. If you are somebody who often is just instantly yelling at the students, a lot of students in your classroom who have experienced trauma literally will flinch when they hear somebody yelling or arguing or raising their voice. So I want you to try to be mindful of making that safe space. We want to make sure that they feel safe in your classroom at all times. Number five, increasing student choice. So giving students more control over their learning by allowing them to choose activities or topics that interest them. You're helping to build their self-worth. So they need more choices. And number six, limiting exclusionary practices. I really do want you to try to avoid sending students out of the classroom as a first resort. Instead of taking away incentives or sending them to the principal's office, think of alternative ways to address behaviors while keeping them still in the classroom. I know some behaviors that this is just absolutely impossible to do because they're disrupting the learning of other students. And so most of the time they have to be out of the classroom. But there are different ways to be able to help them within the classroom and keep them there. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into some examples of self-regulation strategies. I know you're probably already familiar with a few, but it never hurts to have more tools in your toolbox. I am constantly looking for different ways to kind of talk about self-regulation and learn about new tools, but here's just a few. So number one is rainbow breathing. So this is a fantastic way to help students kind of refocus by having them imagine drawing a rainbow with their breath. Inhaling slowly and exhaling just as slowly, and really imagine drawing that breath, drawing that rainbow. The second one is bubble breathing. So similar to the kind of rainbow breathing, here students imagine blowing bubbles. they take a really deep breath in and blow out slowly as if they're trying to keep the bubble from popping. And sometimes they even have the students, if they're younger, hold up their hands and make the bubble bigger as they're blowing out and moving their hands that way. Another one is movement breaks. So incorporating sensory paths in your classroom or in the hallway, or even giving them a simple squeeze, can help students get physical input that they need to refocus. There are a ton of different things that you could do. I often like putting on a simple Danny Go video or a Go Noodle video to get all of the students up and get their blood pumping and their mind off of the work just for 2 minutes. The next one is a choice or reinforcement boards. So providing students with visual choices can help them feel more in control and reduces frustration and improves their focus. So sometimes students are so distracted or so angry about the trauma that they have been through, or maybe they argue with their parents every single morning and their mom beats them out the door. Like this is happening in America right now. So by the time they get to school, they want a safe space, right? Sometimes this is all they can think about in the day, and offering those visual choices for them to not have to think about it, they just see it on a paper and they can choose from that, really improves their focus. And the last one is having built-in breaks and visual timers. Sometimes students need to know when it's okay to take a break, or maybe they see a transition that's coming and transitions are hard because they don't know what to expect. Visual timers can help with this. So really, don't forget the power of therapy animals or really any other interactive companions, which have been shown to have incredible calming effects on students dealing with trauma. I know when I used to work for my old district, I worked in the summer school program, so ESY always had a therapy dog that visited once a week, and I would send my students down to the office to kind of give them that 5 to 10 minute time to kind of calm down with a pet. So remember, creating a trauma-sensitive classroom doesn't mean we all have to have the answers, right? It just means we have to be aware, we have to be flexible, we have to be patient. It's about understanding that trauma can show up in so many ways, and it's our job to be a source of safety and stability for these students. So that's it, guys. I really hope today's episode gave you some valuable insights into trauma and how we can adjust our classrooms to better support our students who've experienced it. And don't forget to check out my resources in the show notes for more strategies. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. Until next time, bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Teach, Taskbox, Inspire. I hope you've gained some tips and motivation to fuel your week ahead. If you're ready to explore more strategies for empowering your students as independent learners, be sure to dive into my free training at chalkboardsuperhero.com/training. And don't keep all this knowledge to yourself. Share this episode with your special education teacher friends who could use some motivation and inspiration. One more thing before you go. If you're finding this podcast helpful and want to show support, head to Apple Podcasts and leave your rating and review. Until next time, keep teaching, taskboxing, and inspiring.